أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. I bear witness that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah and Allah alone. And I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah is his last divinely sent messenger and the seal of the prophethood. Ameen. Brothers and sisters, friends of Salam Media, friends of El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan and the Afia Foundation, we want to welcome everyone, all of our friends and viewing guests or listening guests in South Africa, the United States, and around the world, to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I am pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Now, for those unfamiliar with this network, Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. I've decided, brothers and sisters, friends of Salam Media and your brother Saalakhan, that I would dispense with a formal introduction of today's guests. And the reason being is basically twofold. For one, I believe the majority of those who will be viewing this broadcast know who he is. And secondly, because inshallah ta'ala, we're going to delve into some of this brother's personal history during the course of this conversation. And without any further ado, I want to welcome my dear brother, Mahmood Abdul Rauf, to the
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a long time.
Alhamdulillah, brother. I'm so happy to have you with us.
Likewise.
Tell me something before we get into this conversation. Do you remember when we first met?
I can't remember exactly, but I'm assuming it was in association with Masjid al-Islam and Imam Musa somewhere. But I can be wrong.
You know something, and you know something, it probably was. I had been racking my brain trying to remember exactly when it was and what that circumstance was by which we first met. And it may very well have been through Imam Musa. What I do know is that it was around the time, shortly after we met, I had a visit to Mississippi, where you lived and you were based at the time.
Yes, I remember.
I had family there, and my family in Moss Point. And you were, if I remember correctly, you were leading a community and living in Gulfport.
Yes.
Was it Gulfport? Yeah. And you were kind enough to host a visit. My visit with the community. Alhamdulillah. It's one of my dearest memories. This was back in the 90s. Yes. I don't remember what part of the 90s it was, but I know it was the 90s.
Right.
It was either early or mid 90s, but I do warmly remember that visit. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes of our discussion today, my brother. Let's begin with where you were born, where you grew up, and what your formative years were like.
I was born in Mississippi, a town called Gulfport, Mississippi. Actually, I wasn't born traditionally in a hospital. I was born by midwife.
Okay.
Actually, that ended up being not too far from the first masjid that was constructed in Gulfport, that by the grace and mercy of Allah, I myself and brothers and sisters uh, created, for the lack of a better word. But yeah, I grew up in Mississippi. I grew up, relatively poor. My mother, I grew up without a father. I didn't know until later on that he happened to have been a white man. And this is when my first year in the NBA. My mother had the equivalent of an eighth grade education.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though we were pushed to be educated, or to rather get a degree, or no, a diploma, she couldn't, I'm not saying what she couldn't see, but there was not talk about college. And it's probably because she couldn't see that far, because she
Mm-hmm.
never got past the eighth grade. But we didn't grow up in a family where there was a lot of books, where there was critical thinking skills being developed, where there was problem solving being talked about and developed. So this is kind of the environment I grew up in. Um, and early on, you develop in that environment. In my case, anyway, you don't see yourself as using academics as being successful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for me, I gravitated to sports. I knew that I had the abilities very early, fast twitch muscles, speed, agility. And so I capitalized on that to the best of my abilities, using that as a tool to get out of the ghetto. Um, and I developed early. Uh, I, I would like to say I looked at myself as being inadequate, inferiority complex when it came to academics.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is briefly kind of like what I grew up around, and a typical story when you hear about children growing up in the ghetto, surrounded by the drug addiction, the prostitution, and all of those types of things.
Did you? It's interesting that this reference you made to your biological father. Did you ever meet him, and did you all ever form any kind of relationship?
I don't. She never gave me a name. The
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing is that, and a lot of people don't know this, so I'm giving this to you. Um, my my older and younger brother know who their father is. My older brother's father was a white guy who happened to be in the pharmaceutical business,
Mm-hmm.
and my younger brother's father is an African American who was in the military.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the years of asking my mother who my father was, she always resisted,
Mm-hmm.
and she never gave it to me. And the only thing that she gave me was when my first year in the NBA, I had to come at her from a different angle.
Mm-hmm.
And she would always say, "Boy, get out of my face. I don't want to talk about that." This particular time, I said, "Mom, I love you." I said, "You've always been for me, my mother and my father." I said, "But there's a part of me that's missing. I just, I just, I just want to know." And I said, "It's not that if I find out I'm going to run and forget you, that ain't going to happen. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a piece that I would like to know for numerous reasons."
Right.
And that's when she ended up blurting out. She said, "He's white." And it took her years just to even get that out. And so I tried to make a joke about it. I said, "Darn, I thought I had more rhythm than that," you know, just to kind of ease her conscience, because I knew it was hard for her.
Yeah.
And but what's interesting is that years later, as I began to think about it and ask some of my family and even her best friend, who's still living to this day, people in the South, sometimes they have a way of, I guess, in their way, honoring the dead. My mother passed away some years ago, about 16 years ago, and I went back, and I know Gail knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, she just blanketly told me, she said, "Mahmoud, I promised your mama,"
Mm-hmm.
right? And so and I'm saying that because I started getting information from people. I did a DNA test with one guy. He wasn't white, but I said, okay, I'm gonna try, and it came out negative. But then I started hearing about another guy, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he's wealthy, and he's white in the South. And this particular guy, I was told that when I was playing basketball, not until I got to high school, because he was not affiliated with sports in any way, shape, or form. They had a club called the Admirals Hardwood Club. where they would, people with money, they would put money into it so we can travel to different states and play basketball, stay in the hotels.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I entered high school, because I'd had a name prior to getting to high school, he joined the club and started putting money in it from what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would see this guy on occasion drive through the ghetto, and he would just drive slow and he would look at me like out of curiosity, and he'd
Mm-hmm.
keep driving. And I noticed this when I was younger,
Mm-hmm.
but when he came on the scene, I'm like, man, this is the same dude.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a connection there. And, I wouldn't be surprised it's because of who he is. There's like if you sleep with a black woman, you never know, hey, keep your mouth shut.
Mm-hmm.
Something can happen to you type of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's not far-fetched to believe that that could be the case because I'm the only child that doesn't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you recall? Wait a minute. Before I get to this question, when did you enter the NBA, and what was expected of you, and what did you expect of yourself?
I left after my sophomore year, so I think that was 1990, 91, I believe. The expectations was that I was going to come in and be an impact. Doug Moe drafted for me, traded, I think, Fat Lever and Alex English. I think he had made a comment in terms of the scoring ability, not since Jordan or something like that, is what I think, something alluded to. So he had plans for me to come in right away and be an impact, but they fired him. They brought in Paul Westhead, and we didn't click. And there was a lot of other things that took place, my
And
fault also.
this was the Denver Nuggets.
Denver Nuggets, yes,
Okay.
sir. Yeah,
Yeah.
Denver Nuggets. So initially, that was the expectations. The expectations I had for myself. I mean, I dream big. I think big. It's
Mm-hmm.
coming in right,
Mm-hmm.
continuing what I left doing at LSU. But the opposite happened, and it took me a couple few well, yeah, a few years to get into my own after going through some, a lot of anxiety and stress and depression, not being used to the weather, coaching changes, we're not clicking. I really began to question. I was so close of like literally letting it go. I was that I was that
Hmm.
I was that depressed, and then it took me to go into a grocery store where I read this article, and it said that at the time my name was Chris Jackson. I hadn't become a Muslim yet, and it said he's a bust, and that just lit a fire in me. And I said, well, I don't want to go out like that. And then so I started training a lot. And long story short, I became a Muslim after my first year. And then that second year, I was going through the transition of losing weight and Ramadan, and then that third year, I got most improved. Alhamdulillah.
Just a couple of days ago, yeah, 2 or 3 days ago,
Mm-hmm.
I just happened to come across a clip
Uh-huh.
that was it was the first time I had ever seen it, and it was just it was exciting for me to watch. I watch it a couple of times, and that brings me to this next question. What do you recall about the February 1996 game when the Denver Nuggets broke the 18-game winning streak of the Chicago Bulls? You were on fire during that during that game, my brother.
Yeah. I'm gonna tell you exactly my mindset. I mean, you always, no matter who you play, you look to, when it's all said and done, win or loss, you want the world to remember you,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so it was no different that night, but there was something a little bit different in the sense that they had started playing Michael Jordan at the one, guarding one guards. And he had just left a couple of cities where I think Damon Stoudemire, the guard that used to play in Toronto, had lit him up for some good numbers, and somebody else had lit him up too because it's a different position. It's
Yeah.
like me playing Michael Jordan on the post all night, and he's 6'6". That's a lot of weight,
Mm-hmm.
to carry around or to fight. And so I felt naturally so, you're like, hold on, man. uh, he's coming into our world in a sense,
Hmm.
and I don't want to be the oddball. You
Hmm.
know, these guys just lit him up. Now he's coming to Denver. You know, so it was like it was heightened for me at that moment. And so
Yeah.
my objective was, from the door, I'm going to try to make it known that it's not that type of night. And then so it just so happens that he was on me, but they eventually switched him off of me and started sending a whole different array of people my way. But that's exactly what was on my mind during that time.
Yeah, that was something, brother. Watching that clip, and I'm gonna when I send the link out to this conversation that you and I are having,
Hmm.
to those who didn't get the pre-sent YouTube link. I'm
Right.
going to include that link as well, so folks who might want to see some exciting moments during that game can revisit it.
Mashallah.
Um, you briefly touched upon you know the time frame of your embrace of Islam. What was the circumstance that led you to Islam? And 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 again, when did that happen exactly? When and what the circumstance was?
I had a lot of questions growing up. I grew up in a Christian family, Baptist persuasion. A
In the
lot of
South.
influence. Yes, in
In
the
the South.
South, in Mississippi. Yeah,
Yeah.
more so coming from my grandmother, my aunt, and uncle. And I mean, I'm talking about even the sanctified churches. I don't. A lot of people don't know about those churches. You go in the morning, you come out at night. And literally.
Yes.
And so, but I began to have questions. And the problem was that when I began to ask certain questions, I would get two different responses, and they were just unsatisfactory to me. But I didn't say anything, but it sat with me for a while. And those responses were, you just got to believe and you can't question God.
Hmm.
And I'm saying to myself, well, God gives me a mind, and I'm not questioning because I'm trying to be nasty about it. I'm questioning because I want to know,
Hmm.
I want to learn. And so, long story short, I eventually get to LSU, and the head coach, Dale Brown, this pale white guy from North Dakota, he'll say that about himself as well. He hands me, he reads profusely. He hands me the autobiography of Malcolm.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. And I never, and even at that time, which shows the lack of knowledge or insightfulness or exposure I had, I didn't know Malcolm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I didn't even know who Malcolm was. I was so immersed in basketball and trying to make it to the NBA and just doing my schoolwork.
Hmm.
And Dale knew a lot of people. He literally could get on the phone with Farrakhan. He can get on the phone with Dick Gregory. He's well known. And I began to read his book. Read the book on El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, and I couldn't put it down.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about him and his upbringing and how he seemed to definitely transformed himself.
Yes,
And I'm saying, wow, and how his mind worked. Uh, Very analytical, right? Um, Thought provoking. At the same time, I'm noticing how courageous he is
hmm.
to speak his conscience in the front of anybody, in particular white people.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but think about my life, because I believe that your life, your environment has a way of molding and shaping you. The things that you hear year in and year out, the things and the images that you see, how you see your parents, you see your people that you admire, how when they have to confront white people, they have this like downtrodden look, this submissive look, like they can't speak their conscience, but in private they're cursing, they're saying what they want, but in public.
Hmm.
And so I saw that I saw myself carrying those qualities, and I didn't like it. I knew
Hmm.
it didn't feel natural, and I didn't want it for myself. And so I'm reading his book, and I'm looking at, I'm processing all of this, and I'm saying, man, I want some of what he. I'm competitive. So if I'm looking at the game and I'm saying things, well, we see qualities in people that we know that we don't necessarily possess. And if we're
Hmm.
going to honest with ourselves, we have to say, I don't have that, but I want it.
Yeah.
I like that. And so I just kept thinking about it. And it got to the point where I was drafted to the NBA, and I'm missing a lot because I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I was drafted to the NBA. I met this guy named Mark James out of New York, but I was still conflicted because you grow up all most of your life, and this is all you know, and you're afraid to let it go because you're thinking, well, what if I'm wrong? And so I'm still talking, even though I grew up as a Baptist, I'm talking to this Catholic priest in Denver. And he had a protege named Mark James. Make a long story short, Mark James and I became close. One day in my home in private, Islam came up in conversation. And I said, man, you interested? He said, yeah, you? I said, man, yes. I've been reading Malcolm and I've never, pursued going to, pick up the Quran. But that's when he said that he met a Muslim brother named Abdullah at the airport because he worked at the airport. And he said, he told us we can go and pick up the Quran. And we rushed. I'm talking about, man, I was like a kid, man, like literally, like I'm getting ready to, back in those days celebrating Christmas. Can't wait to go and see what. And we go, we there was a guy who was very hospitable to us, talked to us briefly. I couldn't hardly hear what he had to say because I was just thinking, man, I want to get my hands on this book. I need to go see what's in it. We rushed back to the house. He opened his, I opened mine, about 2 to 3 pages. I looked across the table at him. I said, I don't know about you. My search is over. I'm going to be a Muslim. Because what I read,
Wow.
yeah, what I read in those 2, 3 pages, I can't remember what it was, but I remember to this day how it made me feel and still makes me feel. Every time I pick up the Quran, it answered all the questions I had. It was no doubt in my mind that this was the absolute truth at that moment. And and I was asked not too long ago, they said, man, what is it about Islam that 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 attracts you? I said, from day one until now, every time I engage it, it has never ceased to satisfy my curiosity and answer my questions.
Mhm.
And that's what drew me there, and that's what keeps me there,
Alhamdulillah.
despite my flaws.
Alhamdulillah. It's interesting, brother. I can't help but be deeply touched by the fact that, Malcolm's legacy continues to do dawah, and it is a legacy that has touched so many people, both here and abroad. It was the beginning of my journey to Islam.
Yes.
As a very troubled teenager, it was the beginning of my journey, and I'll never forget years later when I was on my way to Hajj.
Mhm.
I was on one of those international flights, and my seatmate ended up being a for one of those connections, ended up being a Caucasian, blonde-haired, blue-eyed European, from one of the Scandinavian countries, either Norway or Sweden. And at one point he decided, I'm reading, and he decided, I guess he wanted to start up a little conversation, or he could have just been curious. He
Right.
wanted to know. He asked me what was I reading, and I just turned the cover over, and it was one of the books on Malcolm.
Mm.
And he smiled, and he said, no, he was from Iceland, because I remember his response. He said, he smiled, and he said, the best-selling books in Iceland are on Malcolm X. That blew me away, brother.
Wow.
But it's
Yeah.
really something, and it's a reflection of that ayah in the Quran that reads in translation, do not say of those who are slain in the way of Allah that they are dead.
Right.
They are alive, receiving sustenance from their Lord, but
Right.
you perceive it not. And this is one of the manifestations of that ayah.
True.
Malcolm was martyred, but he is still, he is more alive today in the hearts of so many people around the world
You're right.
than he was during the time when he was living and breathing on this side of the earth. It's really
Right.
something, brother.
I agree. And his writings, if you pick them up today, they're timeless.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's speaking to our situation right now.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a tribute to his mind. MashaAllah.
Now, Aki, let's, for those who are not as much aware as they should be, as much aware as they want to be, let us revisit the controversy that brought you really to national and I would dare to say probably international attention. And but also I want to connect with this revisit of that controversy. Um, I want to kind of try to invite you to go into your head, into your psyche, and hindsight, they say, is 2020.
Right.
Looking back on the controversy that erupted around the principal stand you took at the height of your career, you were in your prime.
Yeah.
The flag, that controversy regarding the flag. Do you have any regrets about what you did? And if you could do it all over, would you do anything differently?
Um, to answer the first question, no, I do not have any regrets. My policy has always been, I mean, for the most part, is whatever decisions that I make, if I can learn something for them, or they can build up on my character and who I am, there's no regrets whatsoever. I only regret constant mistakes that I'm making, if that makes any sense. But like you say, hindsight is something else, right? Um, I would, you know, I don't know if you asked me, would I do it again or would I change something?
Yeah, would you do anything differently?
Yeah, would I do anything differently? Let me ask. Looking back in hindsight, yes, we can say that. But also the other part of me, and you already know this, and I'm speaking,
Yeah.
to a person who knows, is that I was supposed to go through that,
Yes, that's right.
right?
Yeah.
So, but if I'm doing these intellectual teasers, right,
Yeah.
using hindsight, I would say yes. I would have liked to have been, even now at 50, I would like to be more informed about the world. Even now that I read profusely, but I still want to be more informed. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be stronger in my faith. I want to have stronger networks,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I look at what Kaepernick did, right? I thought when I when I did it, man, I was so happy that people in positions of wealth and fame, because it's good to see, right? It's good to see that side of people standing up and risking, their positions. But I was like, wow, look at the team that he has, right? They have Know Your Rights campaign. They're doing
Mm-hmm.
things with sending planes of food to Somalia, well organized, it seemed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
man, I wish I would have, thought that through
Yeah.
in that way, so that whatever you're doing, you want it to come from your heart and be feasibility.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, coming from your heart, being feasibility, you want it to be the most impactful. And I think oftentimes if you're fortunate to prepare, it could be that way. But then again, on the flip side of that, maybe in preparing and thinking about the A, B, C's, and D's, you end up not being as impactful and sometimes end up not doing anything because you overthink.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say I would have probably changed
Mm-hmm.
that part of it. And that's saying a lot, being more informed, um, having more of a network, having things in place, um, to galvanize as many people as possible. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely those things. I would have, if I would have placed myself back, being how my mind is now. Yes, but on the flip side too, you got to be careful because sometimes those things we think too much and we think ourselves out of doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Yeah.
alhamdulillah, I don't have any regrets whatsoever, and I'm still doing it. I'm still taking these positions because, I mean, despite the fact that none of us are perfect. We strive to be the best we can, but there's one thing that I don't ever want to compromise, is being that person who stand up, You know, as Allah says in Quran, He says, speak out against injustice, even if it's against yourself.
Yes.
You know, and so for me, I know what it feels like to be black in this country. On top of that, to be Muslim in this country. On top of that, to be black Muslim with a disability, as some would call it, Tourette syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and how you're viewed and how you're discounted, right? And so I know how it feels. I know how it feels to be poor, not to have a lot to eat, not to have sometimes the proper clothing to wear. So I'm always putting myself in a position to never forget. And so I'll inshallah I'll always be that person, um, that that despite what may happen, you know, death or poverty, that I have to go out swinging.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just my policy. And a lot of that was influenced, as we were talking earlier about El-Hajj Malik Shabazz.
Yeah.
And then, of course, becoming Muslim, all the other exemplary figures that we hear in history, the
Yes.
prophets, the
Yes.
imams, the caliphs, you name it. People in this country, outside of this country, the Patrice Lumumbas, the Nkrumahs, I mean, the
Yeah.
list goes on, the people that inspiration that we can pull from. Yeah.
Now, when you took that stand, did you have any of the past sports related precedents in mind? You know, the injustice that was done, for example, to the Native American Jim Thorpe, the 1968 Olympics, Muhammad Ali's principal stand against military induction. Did you have any of that in mind?
You know, I knew of some. I knew of, excuse me, obviously Muhammad Ali,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that wasn't in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I knew the potential consequences of taking certain positions, but that wasn't in my mind. I'd gotten to the point, Maury, where, and even now, I've gotten to the point in my life, you know, growing up, seeing the things and seeing people not feeling that they can speak their conscience, say what's on their mind, and be free to do that. And Malcolm influenced me big time with that. I said, man, I want that. I want to have that courageousness to where I don't fear,
Yeah.
but Allah, you know. And so, uh, let me see. I missed my point. You just, what were we talking about?
Well, I asked you about precedents, if any of the sports figures of the past,
Yeah, yeah.
or any of those issues
Alhamdulillah.
impacted you.
Yeah, thank you. So I didn't. That was, even though I knew that that was there. My
Mm-hmm.
main thing, Maury, was the truth is more important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was just about, you know, I started meeting people, man. I mean, when I became a Muslim, my best educational years at that time, all the way up to that point, wasn't what I learned in college, wasn't what I learned through junior high and high school and elementary. It was when I became a Muslim, almost every road trip that I took, brothers would meet me. I don't know how they found out, but they would find out where we stayed. Salaam alaikum, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And I was, man, so giving of my time. I'm just a people's person. I would, if I felt good, and most of them made me feel good about them, I invited them up to my room. We would order room service. We would spend the nights until we had to leave the next morning because we didn't have a plane at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we would literally talk about religion, sociology, psychology, history, because you got all these people with different disciplines.
Yeah.
And they would introduce me to books. You know, the Noam Chomsky's, Gore Vidal's, Randall Robinson, Kawaza Kunjufu's, Amos N. Wilson's. And I'm trying to take it all in because I feel like, man, I've been deprived all of these years.
Yeah.
There's so much I don't know. And Islam infused in me this love for reading, because when I became a Muslim, you had to fast during Ramadan, and I didn't know that it was highly recommended. I thought it was obligatory that you got to read a part per day.
Mm-hmm.
So when Ramadan was over, I finished the whole Quran. I felt a sense of accomplishment, and then on top of that, not just finishing it, I'm having conversations, and people think it's making sense. So that built confidence, because I
Yeah.
wasn't that person in class. As I said, I would look at myself as being inferior. I wouldn't ask questions, didn't want to answer questions. I shied away from that.
Mhm.
And so when I started reading, man, it started pricking my conscience. I started having an attitude because I'm like, wow, this thing is global. This is just not here. There's a connection systemically with what's happening. It's like a design. And so I started getting angry. And my anger turned into, man, I can't, like Allah says in Quran, don't be like a donkey with books on your back. You got all this information. What you gonna do with it?
Mhm.
So I said, man, I gotta do something. I just can't sit on this. Because, Aaron Dottie Roy says something, I use this all the time. She says, once you see something, you can't unsee it. To be silent, to say nothing, is
Mhm.
just as political an act as speaking out. Either way, you're accountable. So
Mhm.
now that I got this, am I gonna be silent about it? Or am
Mhm.
I gonna take it? Because either way, I'm accountable. I said, well, shoot, if I'm just as accountable as being silent, I might as well go for broke. Let
Mhm.
it all hang out. So
Yeah.
this was my position, and it still remains my position to this day.
Yeah, Aaron Dati Roy, that's a very impressive Indian sister, man. I got nothing but a lot of love and respect for her.
Yes.
Um, it's really interesting, brother. I want to say to especially the young folk who see this interview, who hear what you just said, I want to say to them, this is an example of a sterling observation made by that great freedom fighter, Frederick Douglass.
Mm,
He said, a man, and of course this equally applies to a woman,
mm.
is worked on by what he works on. He may carve out his circumstances, but his circumstances will carve him out as well. And what you just described, brother, in your own life, is an example of that. I mean, you were like me.
Yeah.
The first book that I ever read that didn't have a lot of pictures in it, because when I was young, I was a comic book, uh,
Yeah.
fan. I mean, uh, I had, brother, I had boxes of Superman and Batman and Thor and SubhanAllah. If I had those Daredevil, if I had those boxes of books, man, still they would be collected by. I think I would
That's
have
right.
a lot of money in my hands, brother.
That's
I
right.
remember one time my mother, I got into trouble. I got into trouble, and as a punishment, my mother threw out all of my boxes of comic books.
Oh wow.
SubhanAllah. But you couldn't get me to read a book that
Right.
didn't have a lot of pictures in it. The
Right.
first one was the Autobiography of Malcolm X.
Mm.
And I read that book in detention. I had gotten
Mm.
arrested for something. And the detention center, in fact, it was the county jail, where I really shouldn't have been because I was a juvenile, but they had
Yeah.
put me in this county jail. And it was, for me, it was an example of the good, when I look back, the good that can come out of adversity.
Mm-hmm.
Because roughly, I think it was about a month and a half, 2 months I spent in that jail, is what led me to that little library, because I didn't have anything else,
Yeah.
to fill my time with. And I just happened to see on the bookshelf, I was drawn to this book. It was The Qadr of Allah. I was
Mm.
drawn to this book titled The Autobiography of Malcolm X. And I took that
Mashallah.
book back to the cell with me. And that book changed my life. I mean,
Mashallah.
I was like you, Aki.
Yeah.
I want to be like him.
That's right.
And I especially related to, his very difficult upbringing, especially after his father was killed and his mother
Mm-hmm.
ended up being institutionalized and the
Right.
family was broken up and all the changes he went through. Man, I related to that.
Right.
So anyway, getting back to this discussion, well, the formatted part of this discussion, in our latest release, the imprisonment of Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin, is it a
Yeah.
government conspiracy? There's a chapter on the 1968 Olympic protests for human rights.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually an interview of the brother who led that the organization of that protest, Dr. Harry Edwards.
Harry Edwards. Yes.
My good friend, broadcast journalist Heather Gray, right there in Atlanta at WRFG. She gave us permission to include that eye-opening interview in the book. By chance, do you have a copy of the book?
Which what?
I mean the imprisonment of Imam Jamil Abdul Alameen. Is it a
No,
government?
I don't have that one.
Okay, Aki. When we finish up, well, text me your
I
mail
will.
address. Inshallah
Okay.
ta'ala, tomorrow I'm going to put a copy in the mail to you.
Mashallah. I love
Because I
to
want
read
you to read it and I want to get some feedback from you on it.
Okay.
Inshallah
I love
ta'ala. But that's the second chapter of the book, and it's an eye-opening chapter, brother. It's really an eye-opening chapter because what they did back then. It was so profound and it was so very impactful then, and it for me it reverberates to the here and now, to where we are right now. Anyway, Imam Jamil, the point that I wanted to make was that Imam Jamil, who was himself an outstanding athlete,
I heard.
He also used sports to draw attention to America's inequities. It's really interesting. But anyway, inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to send a copy of the book to you.
Please do.
Your thoughts on what's happening today in professional sports, Akeem, especially as it pertains to the protest front, to the Black Lives Matter mobilizations that are taking place here and abroad, and the way that sports and sports figures have factored into the equation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you just said it. Sports has always been, I think, sort of a catalyst in many ways of bringing attention to issues. Jack Johnson's, Muhammad Ali's, even when you look at Paul Robeson, playing sports, right?
Yeah.
So there's numerous people that you can pull from, men and women, and I'm loving what I'm seeing in the sense of this, that people are becoming more vocal, they're becoming more visible. The fear that I have, and that's a strong word, is that so often when you know athletes, I like to say human beings who happen to be athletes, take positions, our these positions are easily co-opted. And Richard Itten, a political scientist, because it's popular now, right? It's popular to wear I can't breathe T-shirts, to have Black Lives Matter splattered on the court. Um, even coaches and people are getting into it, right?
Right.
To say things at the press conference, but national television. I mean, you name it. It's become very popular. But Richard Itten, a political scientist, made the statement that he cautious viewing, and I think there's a difference too between protest. It might be a slight difference between protest and resistance, but he says he cautions viewing resistance as inherently revolutionary because once it becomes routine, it's easily anticipated by the dominant authorities and then therefore easily molded into their hegemonic understanding of things. So again, when you begin to say, well, we allow our players to do this, we allow our players to, we're more progressive, and it becomes popular, it loses some of its punch. Prime example of, the NBA talks a lot about how progressive it is. And compared to football, okay, it's a different story, but I think they're very sophisticated in how they deal with things. When they were in China, James Harden and Westbrook they were asked a question, and they were getting ready to speak their conscience, and they were stopped by somebody in the NBA saying, "Look, keep it to basketball." But I did a little reading and research, and I'm like, and I know that there's some huge business interests in China with the NBA, but also what I found out was that where the Uyghur Muslims, all right, are being victimized and genocide is being, one can say, perpetrated upon them. The NBA has a facility in Uyghur, in that area. They're doing business there, but this isn't highlighted.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that people are speaking out. I like the fact that people are visible. But I think also, when we look at this thing, man, the concept of inclusion and diversity, right,
Yes.
comes up, and there's this. It seems like there's this major push for to be visible and to be noticed, but it's often at the expense, I think, of real structural changes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You know, I think a powerful move could have been made if they would have just not played when Milwaukee said, "Look, we're not playing." This is what the United States does when they're trying to bring a country to the negotiating table and they don't want to listen. Economic sanctions,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, but there's so much that can be said about it. But that's pretty much. It's nice to see. Um, and I think too, and I mentioned this earlier, not with you, talking to someone else, that and I have to look back at my situation. We have to know our limitations.
Mm-hmm.
So as athletes, it doesn't mean that we're not intelligent. Everybody has an opportunity or should have an opportunity.
It looks like we're having a little bit of a challenge now with our brother's transmission. Inshallah ta'ala.
Hello.
Okay, got you.
I apologize. Yeah,
That's all right.
everyone, whether you're an athlete, whether you work on a garbage truck, everybody is entitled to speak their conscience.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also we have to be careful, me included. You know, there are people who study these issues, been studying these issues for life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And sometimes we allow them to project us,
Mm-hmm.
you know, into these positions as if though we are bona fide scholars and leaders, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And we're being used in so many ways.
Right.
It's okay, speak your conscience, say what you're gonna say, and I'm for that. Look, because I'm still doing it.
Right.
But we also have to know our limitations,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then also, I think if we can get to that point where we can begin, and you already know, man, just because you're a scholar, just because you're an imam, just because it don't mean that you're on the right side,
Right.
right? But I think when we begin to to join forces with each other, like the athletes who have the visibility, seek out those that intelligentsia, so to speak, that world of scholarship, those people that know the issues and that are not co-opted, that are not sold. I mean, you know, bought and sold.
Right.
Like bring those forces together. I mean, I think that's a powerful mix.
Indeed.
A powerful mix.
Indeed. I agree. And on that note, which athletes today are you most impressed with, and why?
That's a good question. Um, I mean, it's bits and pieces of stuff that I see. Um, you know, I can't say that like overall there's one athlete that in terms of the total package that
Right.
I can look at.
Right.
But I mean, I'm liking a lot. You know, I'm liking. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of these brothers, whether it's LeBron James, Chris Paul, whether it's the positions that Kyrie was trying to take, right? Whether it's what's the lady that Maya Moore, right, fighting for, you know, the false incarceration of the brother that I think she ended up marrying, right? But still pushing those issues of
Mm-hmm.
false incarceration and things of that nature. Man, those are beautiful things.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful things. And establishing the nonprofit organizations to help people, right? To support causes. And they're not just establishing, some of these are not just establishing them in terms of it's an organization on paper, but no, they're involved.
Mm-hmm.
They're out there in the streets. You know, Malcolm Brogdon's, the athletes that went out and protested, right? What's his name? Steven Jackson, that's constantly talking about these issues, right? So I'm. Those are some of the things that keep influencing me, keep inspiring me, keep giving me hope,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
To continue on top of already what my religious orientation is with Islam. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I see stuff like that.
Before I forget, I just want to mention, are you still based in Atlanta? Are you still in Atlanta?
Yes, I'm in Atlanta, but I've been in New York though for about over 3 months training. So that's why
Oh,
I'm in this car right now. I'm
oh, is
constantly
that
moving.
right? So you've been in New York
Yeah.
training, you say? Wow.
Yeah. I'm training some NBA guys.
Okay. Mashallah. All right. Well, I was about. Well, so do you expect to still be in New York next weekend, or will you be back home? And the reason why
Oh no, I mean, inshallah.
I ask is because there's going to be a national rally for Imam Jamil next Sunday in Atlanta. There's a national rally for Imam Jamil, and there and also on the West Coast where Amir Abdul Malik Ali is in Oakland. There's going to be a national rally there
Yeah.
as well. So, but the main national rally is going to be in Atlanta, Georgia, and right now we're in a very unique space and opportunistic time to hopefully get have a way paved for a long overdue
Right.
resolution of
Of
his
course.
case. So inshallah ta'ala, your brother
Of
Saalakhan is
course.
planning to be there in Atlanta for this rally next weekend. And I was just wondering if you were going to be there and if I might see you there as well. But anyway,
I'm trying to get there. Yeah,
okay,
mashallah.
alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Well, Aki, we are winding down now, and there there was one other question I had in mind I wanted to raise, and right now it escapes me. So what I'm going to do is invite you
Alhamdulillah.
to share some uh, to share whatever closing thought that we might not have touched upon that you would like to. Before we get to your closing thought, this is what I wanted to ask you. I've noticed, Saki, that during the course of this discussion that you and I have been having, I have not seen an indication of, that challenge that you've had, that Tourette's
Tourette syndrome.
challenge, brother, syndrome. Yeah, well, what's
You
going
you
on
you
there?
you must have you must have you must have you must have been doing some heavy blinking and missed it. Oh, look, I've learned how to camouflage it to an extent to integrate it into my natural movements, but they're there.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah,
Mashallah.
alhamdulillah. It you brother, I want to say to you, brother, and I mean this with all of my heart. I really mean this, with the brother, as much brotherly love as I can, send through these airwaves. I have a tremendous amount of love and respect for you. I've had for years, and
Likewise,
this
mashallah.
conversation that you and I have just had. Um, has just deepened the well of that love and respect that I've had for you for such a long time. Now, with that said,
No,
we
thank
still
you.
got
I feel
7 minutes left. Are there any thoughts that you have that we didn't touch upon that you would like to share with the audience? Anything
Well,
that
I'm
you
I'm
may
sure
have
there's so
wanted to?
many of them, but I can get long-winded, and I'm afraid that if I start on some of them, I might not be able to finish. But
Oh,
I'll
oh,
just say this.
yeah,
Um, I'm big on reading.
yes,
I'm big on uh, quotes and things of that nature. And um, there's a and I'm always trying to leave with at least a couple um, of quotes, something hopefully that could influence people and make them think and um, analyze their life a little differently. But George Washington Carver, man, and I keep this literally. I think about this daily. I keep it in my kitchen. He said something. He has a quote that I try to live by. He said, "No one has the right to come into this world, then go out of it without leaving behind distinct and legitimate reasons for having passed through it."
Mm.
You know, and I think about, man, you know,
A
Allah has
beautiful quote.
blessed us with gifts and potential, and who are we to waste it,
Hmm.
right? And I think one of the most noble things that we can do if we really want to leave a legacy worth leaving is to be people, man, who think about, there's a verse, we all know it, in Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim, that Allah won't change the condition of a people until you change what's in yourself. Or some, as Muhammad Al-Azi would say, Allah won't change your social condition until you change your social self. And what was interesting about that verse when I was looking at it, you know, Allah mentions qawm, He mentions people before He mentions self, as if though saying that society is more important by and large than just the individual.
Hmm.
And so when we move, navigate throughout this life that we're living in, to really think in a way that's bigger than ourselves. Think about doing something that involves something bigger than ourselves. There's a saying that if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others. The
Hmm.
goal in life is to find your gift. The purpose in life is to give it away, because you can't take any of this with you.
Right.
And so if I was to leave anything, I would, and do all of that with a divine purpose, right? Uh, and I think really if we take that approach, uh, I think we can start making a dent on progress, so to speak.
Hmm.
I don't think it's ever going to be a utopia but I think we can do it in major pockets to where we
Hmm.
can really bring about some serious change. So, alhamdulillah, I would just say that.
Okay, well, that response
Here,
just brought to mind another final question I want to make of you, Aki, put before you. And it has to do with this unprecedented place that we're in right now as a nation. This unprecedented place in time that we're in as a nation and as a global community with this pandemic, and then with in the United States with this whole Black Lives Matter uprising that has been unprecedented as well. Um, what are your thoughts on where we are as a Muslim polity on this question of the challenges that we are being faced with right now, these unprecedented challenges as a nation, and the opportunities that are inherent, as I see it, within these challenges? What you travel the country extensively. You are invited to the national conventions of these major Muslim organizations, etc. You have a very close eye view on what is and isn't happening within this Muslim polity of ours. What is your thought? Um, if we can get him back, if you're hearing this, what is your thought, my brother? What is your thought on? And this will be the final question. What is your thought on the Muslim response, the Muslim community in America's response to this unprecedented moment we are in right now as a nation, the challenges that we face, and the opportunities inherent within these challenges? And again, from our Muslim community standpoint.
I can't
You can't hear me? Okay. Subhanallah, something's going on. You're not muted, are you? Oh, you can't hear. He can't hear me. All right. I tell you what, inshallah ta'ala, we're just going to it's 2:59, so we'll just bring this to a close. We'll bring this to a close. I know he can't hear. Um, uh, Brother Sadiq, inshallah ta'ala, we will bring this to a close, and I will communicate with my brother offline, inshallah ta'ala. I want to end this broadcast by, again, really, really expressing my deepest appreciation to our brother Mahmood Abdul Rauf for joining us for this conversation. I know that not only I, but everyone who was able to tune into this live You got a lot out of it. And others who will see it later will get a lot out of it as well. With that said, I'm going to end as I customarily end this weekly broadcast with the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the Surah Al-Asr in the Quran. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal Asr. Innal insana lafi kusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati. Wa tawasaw bil haqq. Wa tawasaw bis sabr. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and this evening in South Africa. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.